Welcome to the show, everyone. It is the HoopBall Fantasy Basketball pregame show. It is a beautiful Thursday, April 1st, 2021. I'm joined by a very special guest today. He covers the Toronto Raptors for Sports Illustrated. Aaron Rose, welcome to the show. It's great to have you on. How have you been?
I'm doing well. It is not a beautiful day here in Toronto, but that's okay. We will not pull any April Fool's jokes unless you have one planned for me. I will be totally forthcoming and honest with my reporting today.
I was gonna ask if it didn't even dawn on me until literally I just said it the day. I did not know today was April Fool's Day. April Fool's Day. I guess it's just not as conditions have not been great for it over the last couple of years. But yes, no jokes here. We are going to keep things above board for the most part, and I'm sure Aaron, you will be, not trying to mislead any of us here with any shenanigans.
I promise.
But yeah, we have a great conversation about the Toronto Raptors coming up. A very, very interesting team coming down the stretch here with about 1/3 of the season left to go. And yeah, before we, again, this is a HoopBall presentation. You can follow at HoopBall Fantasy on Twitter for breaking news updates on HoopBall, on fantasy basketball information. And of course, for more stuff like this, these interviews and pregame shows, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Drop a like on the video below. It goes a long way, and we really appreciate it. So, Aaron, this is a great time to have you on, because the Raptors have, they are honestly, this is a pivot point for this franchise. It feels like at the moment they are. There's a lot of questions swirling about the future and even the short-term present of this team. And there's a lot of players that I want, and like individuals that I want to talk about with you more in depth. But before we can even dive into any of that, I feel like it's important that we sort of address the big picture that's looming over all of this first, and that's the fact that the Toronto Raptors are 18-30. They are the 11th seed in the Eastern Conference right now, and surprisingly on the cusp of the play-in game, 2 games behind Chicago for that 10th seed. So they're not out of it. It's been a rough stretch recently. The games have not looked good. A pretty rough loss last night to a depleted Thunder team. But, we don't really have a precedent for this iteration of the Raptors in this kind of moment here. Masai Ujiri, he took over 7 years ago. They have made the playoffs each of those years that he's presided over the team. They've been a top 4 seed in all of those years too. So this is not a team that has even been close to this type of situation they're in now, where they could realistically punt the rest of this year to look towards the future. And I know that's something that a lot of, Raptors fans, fantasy basketball managers, they're sort of concerned this could be, the Raptors' final 25 games might be a little weird. So it's a tough question to answer, but I'm wondering what your thoughts are for the last stretch here. Do you think that the Raptors are going to be, looking towards the future here, get healthy, get out of Tampa, and sort of reset next year with a high draft pick? Or do you think that they're going to make a concerted effort to make the playoffs this year?
Well, as you mentioned, you're asking me to answer a question that it has no precedent. So it's going to be hard for me to do that. But what I can tell you is the Raptors are an organization that over the years has been all about winning, and they've done that successfully. And Nick Nurse has not shown any willingness to do any tanking, really. He's not done any real tinkering with the lineups. The only thing recently is Kyle Lowry has this foot injury, and he's been dealing with it off and on since January. And I think recently the Raptors have shut him down. He'll be out for, I guess yesterday, 7 to 10 days. I guess now it'll be 6 to 9 days that the Raptors will be without Kyle Lowry. And that's something he's been dealing with. And maybe they just decided, he's going into free agency this summer. We're not a team going anywhere right now, and maybe we'll take it easy on him. I don't know if it's something he could fight through. But as for the final 25 games of the season or whatever it is, I think they're going to still try and compete as much as they can. I think ultimately what we've seen this season is they're not a team that can compete, even when they're trying to. So they're going to continue running out their best guys whenever they can, at least until they get mathematically eliminated from the playoffs. And that's something that you mentioned, because they're still sort of in the play-in tournament picture. Because there's 10 teams that can make it this season. That might be a while away before they're actually mathematically eliminated, pack up, go home and play your bench kind of situation. So until that happens, I would imagine they're going to continue to play their guys. Now, some of those guys are on the younger side and they might see some tinkering of their offensive workload. And we can talk about some of those things. But I wouldn't imagine until that point that they're mathematically eliminated, I wouldn't imagine too much overt tanking, if you will.
Yeah, and that's sort of what I think most people are expecting here, is that this is just not a team, that's not their style. And I mean, again, because they are still mathematically in it, there isn't a real reason, to start now by any means. But it doesn't. The way things are looking now, it might not be long before we just see that happening. And you mentioned that Kyle Lowry is currently dealing with a foot injury, and he was sort of that was sort of the first player I wanted to get to with you, because I think if the Raptors were to go that route where they start reeling guys back and start of planning for next year, it would start with him. And I guess this question's more about Lowry himself. And, you've been following, him as a Raptors fan and now a reporter as well for a while now. Your impression of Lowry, do you believe that he would be one to sort of like take it back himself in preparation for for free agency? Because, everyone, perception of Kyle Lowry is that he is a workhorse. He's a warrior. He's out there as often and as frequently as he can be. But it seems likely that he's going for another contract. Is probably his last one as a pro, a big one. And it's most likely not going to be with Toronto. And I say that because, we expected him to be traded, but he wasn't. So I guess you never know. But most likely he's going to be out there. So do you think that he would choose to sort of, shut himself down if it were his choice?
I don't think he will shut himself down, because I don't think that this group has shown any inclination, as we just talked about, to do anything like that. I don't think that's in their nature. I think Fred VanVleet, he was distraught in the post-game press conference, sort of the lowest I've seen him covering the team. He was at a loss for words, and he's a guy that is never at a loss for words. So he doesn't know how to lose. I wrote about it today that his record since his high school days, he's the closest he's ever been to a losing season is a team that won 2/3 of their games, and now we're in high school. So this is not a guy who knows how to lose. So I don't think he's a guy who's going to take the foot off the gas pedal unless he's sat down. And so if you're asking me about Kyle Lowry doing it himself, I think that's highly unlikely. He might make sure he's 100% healthy. And this isn't something I know for a fact. I'm sure he's dealing with something quite serious, but we've seen Kyle fight through things in the past. He's been dealing with this foot injury, as I mentioned, since at least late January, when he sat out 2 games with this injury. Nick Nurse said it's the same injury that he had back then, and it's been reoccurring. So he's been battling through it. Now, I don't know if something happened, it's gotten worse, and he has to sit down, or, as I said, maybe the organization said, it's better for the team if maybe you take a few games off, get this right, because maybe we'll lose a few games. Or Kyle Lowry said, I need to get this right because I have free agency and we're not making a playoff push. So I can't tell you what he's doing, but it seems like he's a guy who could make sure he wants to be 100% healthy. And if he has this foot injury lingering, he might want to make sure there's enough time to fully recover from that. As for the organization, I think it's possible, as we talked about, toward the end of the season, when things are basically over and the Raptors are out of the play-in and playoff tournament, it's possible you get more of Malachi Flynn minutes. I think he's a guy who needed some more development this year in the G League, and because the G League was shortened, so there wasn't enough time. And then the Raptors, actually, ironically, Kyle Lowry got injured back then, and the Raptors called him up, and then he was in COVID-19 quarantine for 2 weeks, almost 3 weeks. So he's a guy that's basically, I'm trying to say, is he's had his development stunted the whole time. This has not been the ideal rookie season for him. And he's a guy that the Raptors might look to get more playing time at the expense of Kyle Lowry. So if anything's going to happen, I'd expect it to happen sort of more toward the end of the season. And I would imagine that Kyle might see his minutes dwindle a little bit in favor of somebody like Malachi Flynn.
That's really interesting too. And I want to follow up there real quick, because I think with one of the patents of Nick Nurse run teams is he's very Thibodeauian in how he doles out his minutes. He has his core five, usually the starters, and he runs them out there for really, really high minutes totals. We have not seen a whole lot of deep bench play this year or even in previous years. And so I do think, I would agree that I would, once they're out of the picture, it would make sense to pivot more towards the youth and sort of reduce minutes of the starters. Do you think that beyond Lowry, that could be a thing that you'd see for, I don't know, someone like Pascal Siakam or OG Anunoby?
I think because those two guys are part of the future core and have had their own issues with playing time this season as it pertains to COVID-19 quarantine, that trying to get OG Anunoby more offensive development and getting him the ball and putting him in situations that Norman Powell was in when he was around. So he probably won't be a guy who sees his minutes dwindle because they want him to be put in uncomfortable situations where he's hitting pull-up shots or at least attempting pull-up shots. So I wouldn't expect those two guys to be. I think the guys that you're probably looking at are Kyle Lowry, who's not going to be around with the core, and there is a rookie who plays the same position. And then I don't even know what you want to talk about when it comes to the front court rotation. It's a mess for the Raptors. So Aaron Bain has been a disaster this season from a signing point of view, and I guess a playing point of view as well. So I would imagine his minutes are going to dwindle. I know the Raptors are going to sign somebody before April 8th. They have to because they're currently at 13 players under standard contracts. So somebody is going to come in. From Nick Nurse's press conferences, he's basically said it's going to be a big. He won't say who they're talking to or anything, but that guy, whoever it is, might get some minutes. Chris Boucher is going to continue getting minutes, I would imagine, and OG Anunoby is going to get some minutes at the 5 as the Raptors center. So I wouldn't expect those guys, the core group, but you could see a guy like Aaron Baines to basically stop seeing the court. And Kyle Lowry, I don't think Kyle Lowry is ever going to be a DNP-CD kind of situation or a rest situation where he just doesn't play, but his minutes could wind down toward the end of the season.
Interesting. And yes, I did also see those notes about perhaps them being involved in the buyout market for a big, and that's kind of a good transition to some of the questions I want to ask about Boucher, who by all accounts has had a breakout season of sorts. We've seen him take the next step as both a rim protector and a scorer. We've seen him have really big games and then some more muted ones as well. And, in fantasy basketball, one of the stories about the Raptors all year has been about how his minutes have been yanked around, how some games he'll play, like I just said, some games he'll play a lot, some games he won't, and it might be matchup dependent. Maybe it's like issues with defensive awareness and he gets pulled in certain matchups. Maybe the Raptors like to go small with Anunoby, like you mentioned. So there's a lot of factors at play there. But I think, and this is for more, your keeper leagues and dynasty fantasy managers out there, I'm sure you'd be interested in this one. It's more like, where do you think the future is for Boucher on this team? Do you envision, what would he have to do to earn himself a starter's role where he's maybe even playing 30 minutes a night consistently? Do you think that's something that he can do on this team? Will it require changes to his physicality, or is there some trust that he has to build with the coaching staff to get there? I mean, what's his pathway to that?
I don't think he has a pathway is the short answer to your question. So I think now that doesn't mean he can't play some of the bigger minutes he's played this season, where he's a guy coming off the bench, a sixth man off the bench. But I don't see a path for him in the future with his current body type. And he's like 28 years old, and I don't think that's changing. He's not going to suddenly grow a few inches and gain 100 pounds or whatever he needs to be sort of a true big. Nick Nurse said the other day that he's ideally a 4 in this league, and that's because you mentioned his rim protection, but what I think you meant to say is he's a great shot blocker, and he's phenomenal at that, but he can't really compete with some of the biggest bigs in the NBA. And you mentioned how it's matchup dependent, how one game he'll play a bunch of minutes because they're going up against either a weaker big or a team that likes to go small, and then the next night they're going up against Joel Embiid or Jonas Valanciunas or one of those big bigs in the NBA, and he just can't play. So what the Raptors have tried doing is, earlier they were going with the Baines and Boucher lineup, and that was something that worked relatively well for the Raptors in a down season. Let's keep that in mind. And now I've noticed they've been trying Boucher at the 4 and OG Anunoby at the 5, which you probably wouldn't think of that if you were looking at who's on the court at the time. You would just assume the biggest guy, Boucher's the biggest guy, and he's the 5. But from sort of an inside basketball perspective, this is probably good for fantasy. From little that I know about fantasy, it allows Boucher to play more outside of the paint when he's on defense, so he can actually rush to the perimeter and block those 3-point shots that he's so good at. He doesn't have to bang in the paint and lose to a guy like Embiid. He can actually sort of roam around, play that free safety type in the Raptors defense and help off of guys and really block shots in a way that might be beneficial to his fantasy value going forward. But as for, is he ever going to be a starter in the NBA, or at least is he going to be a starter on the Raptors? I think the Raptors eventually, the next time they compete, are going to have a center on their team that is better than Chris Boucher. And that doesn't mean Chris Boucher, as I said, can't play good minutes. He could be sort of big Lou Williams, if you will, like a spark plug coming off the bench. And I know Nick Nurse likes his energy off the bench. So I think that's a great role for him. But if you're expecting him to, play 35, 40 minutes or what have you in a game in a few years, I would be shocked, I guess I would say, if that were the case.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way of looking at it. I mean, I've had certain questions about that, people wondering what his long-term outlook is and why he's not getting those minutes consistently. And I think that was all a very good, succinct way of putting it. He's just the type of player that he is asked to be or tasked with being. It's just sometimes he has those matchup issues and he has those deficiencies that at his age they might never be truly solved. But that being said, he is still his
body type. Right? Because he doesn't have the physicality. He can't defensive rebound very well. That's something that has cost the Raptors all season. So there's sort of a ceiling on that type of player. He's great at the pick and pop. He's great at the pick and roll, but his defensive ability is lacking aside from the shot blocking, aside from playing that free safety. As I mentioned, that role he's very good at, but that's sort of more suited to a bench unit.
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's definitely worth considering as you look at, when we're just looking at this team next year, see what kind of players they retool with and reassemble with, and wonder what Boucher's role is going to be in that type of setup. Real quick, I want to talk about the move that the Raptors actually did make at the deadline, sending out Norman Powell to the Portland Trail Blazers for Gary Trent Jr. and Rodney Hood. Gary Trent Jr. is, he's a scorer, but in a different way than Norman Powell. He's more of a shooter, whereas Powell had a little more slashing to his game. What have your impressions been of his first few games in Toronto so far, and sort of how he's adapted to filling in that scorer's role that Norman used to occupy?
He looked phenomenal the other night. He had a career high. I think it was 31 points for the Raptors. And I guess when he's playing really well, he can shoot it as well as anyone in the league. You mentioned he doesn't have that explosiveness going to the rim that Norman Powell had. He's very adept in the mid-range. But as I think NBA fans know these days, that's not the most valuable shot. It's not a very desirable shot. So even if he's hitting it at a pretty good clip, it's still not a great shot. He's going to hit his threes at a very good clip, especially when he's playing off ball and sort of catch and shoot threes that he's been very good at for his career. He's not going to put up Norman Powell numbers scoring other than last night. That's not something you should be expecting from him. But I guess what I noticed about last night's game is sort of he had a very Norman Powell stat line in the sense that he has 31 points. I think he had like 1 rebound and 1 assist. So the same kind of numbers as Norman Powell, where Norman was a phenomenal scorer and was a joy to watch play because he could score from anywhere on the court. He was great at that 3-point shot, great on pull-ups and catch and shoot looks, but he didn't give you anything else. And if you're a fantasy manager, I'm sure you are looking at sort of what does he do down the line. And Gary Trent Jr. isn't going to be a guy who gives you any of those numbers. But as you mentioned, he is going to try taking some of that Norman Powell workload offensively. I think he had 22 shots last night. Some of that was just feeding the hot hand and Kyle Lowry being out of the lineup. But I would imagine he will continue to get shot attempts because the Raptors want to find out what he is, who he is. He's going into restricted free agency this summer, so they want to know what kind of contract should we be giving this guy, or should we let him walk? I would imagine that's unlikely, but maybe it's the situation. So they want to find out who he is. So I'd imagine his offensive workload will be there. But other than that, don't expect very much.
Yeah. And I think, the book has been, we've already kind of known this about Gary Trent when we saw him filling in for CJ McCollum in Portland earlier this year, that stretch where he was averaging about 17 points per game with a few threes and maybe 2 boards and an assist. That is sort of his stat set. But the opportunity, no doubt, is going to be there for him, especially if Kyle Lowry misses some time down the stretch. It's evident that he gets elevated, in the offense. And like you said, the Raptors have a vetted interest in seeing what they have in him before they have to make contract decisions in this offseason. So Aaron, I mean, this has been a lot. This has been great. I really do appreciate your insight on all these things. Before you go, I wanted to, and we already touched on this a little bit with topics about Malachi Flynn, sort of picking up some Kyle Lowry minutes. Is there anyone else sort of deep on the Raptors bench that you're sort of looking towards, maybe hoping that there's a little more opportunity coming their way, or is that it's really just kind of Malachi Flynn and Gary Trent Jr. as the two young guys, if you will, on this team who could see an elevated role towards the end of the year?
Well, the other guy in that trade that you mentioned was Rodney Hood. And unfortunately, he went down with a hip injury in last night's game. And it sounded, based on what Nick Nurse was saying, he had negative x-rays. Rodney Hood had x-rays after the game that came back negative, but he needed, he's going to need, we haven't heard the results of it yet, but he needed an MRI. And Nick Nurse said he didn't want to speculate, but it sounded bad. It sounded pretty serious. So I'm sure that isn't a young guy people are looking at, but that means there's going to be opportunities for somebody, because Rodney had sort of contributed off the bench. Now, if you look at the Raptors' track record this season, everyone has had a chance off the bench. Henry Ellison had a chance off the bench, excuse me. Alex Len had a chance off the bench. So every single person has had a chance off the bench this season. And the reason the Raptors are not going anywhere this season is because none of those guys have, with the exception of Chris Boucher, I suppose, have really done anything off the bench. So they have all had their chances and have, for the most part, failed. So I'd imagine, from, again, what little I know in fantasy, you need to be in a deep league to be looking at one of these guys. I imagine if one guy is maybe to keep an eye on, it's Paul Watson Jr. Now, I say that, of course, he's in COVID-19 health and safety protocols. We don't know if he has COVID-19 or doesn't, or if he's in close contact. The team obviously won't say that. Now, Nick Nurse did say it was different than the last time the team had COVID-19 issues. And based on the length of time they were out for, and based on essentially Fred VanVleet spilling the beans last night, it sounds like those guys had COVID-19. That's unofficial, but Fred essentially said as much last night. So if Paul Watson Jr. comes back in sort of the next few days, it would probably indicate that it was just a close contact and he's fine, in which case, he should be back to his conditioning and won't have any long-term COVID-19 issues. And the Raptors, Nick Nurse has said he likes him and wants to see what he has. Now, I don't know what he's going to give you. There's a reason he's kind of a nobody in the NBA, a guy who's undrafted. But in terms of playing time, he's a guy who could get minutes. Now, if he's out for another week or another week and a half or two, it probably indicates that he had COVID-19, and now you've got to wonder what is he going to look like when he comes back, and maybe that's a guy to stay away from a fantasy perspective. But he's the only guy that we haven't seen for long stretches for the most part, and there's a reason we haven't seen him long stretches, because he had no expectations coming to the season, but maybe he's a guy to keep an eye on. Other than that, I'm sort of just like Nick Nurse. I'm at a loss for words at who's going to step up from the bench, because we've seen them all and they've all sort of not performed well.
That's all great. I mean, that I like that Paul Watson Jr. recommendation, just to keep an eye on there towards the end. We have one comment here from Adam King, and we did touch on it a little bit earlier in the show, but in case there's any inside information that you may have as to a potential target on the wire right now, Aaron, is there anyone that you think that the Raptors are specifically looking at for the backup center role? I could only venture to guess right now, and I'm not sure that would be entirely fair. The one guy I think that they should go after is Galley, whose first name, Fee Galley. I'll go with that. He's the Canadian kid who was, I guess, traded from the Clippers, and I don't totally know his story off the top of my head, but I know he's a very talented player. I've spoken to a few people about him, not within the Raptors organization, but they think the Raptors should sign him. So that is a guy that I think the Raptors should go after. The guy I thought they should go after is Alize Johnson, who's now with the Nets and came off the bench the other day and played really, really well. So I don't know why the Raptors didn't sign him, but the Raptors aren't going to get any of the big name guys. I guess you've already seen those guys go off the board. Anybody who's going to want to sign with them is going to be a guy who wants to be part of their system for the next 25 games or whatever it is, and maybe play some minutes in the place of somebody like Aaron Baines, and then test the market at the end of the season. So they have to sign somebody, as I mentioned, because they have
so few spots, or only 13 roster spots. But who that is, and I suppose it could be Utah Watanabe. They could promote him from a two-way to a full contract, but there's no need to do that. So I don't know why they would. But it's starting to look bleak because a lot of those buyout market guys have already signed. So Galley is maybe a guy to keep an eye on, but there's no news there in terms of it actually happening yet.
Well, there's still plenty of time for them to make that decision. That's honestly, that's a great recommendation because he does sort of fit, what I guess we would expect for this Raptors team if they were going to go future forward thinking for next year, sign a young guy like that and give him a chance to see what he can do. So that's just a name to monitor, not reporting or anything, but definitely, that's a good recommendation on your part. So let everyone, that was it. Aaron Rose, thank you again so much for spending some time with us today and going over this team. Guys, you can check out his work for SI. He's at Aaron Bin Rose on Twitter. Please drop him a follow. Great in terms of reporting things in a very quick manner. I know that is key to a lot of your decision making. Aaron, as soon as he finds it, it's out there. So definitely a valuable follow in terms of that stuff. And Aaron, is there anything else you want to plug before we let you go?
No, you can just, as you mentioned, Aaron Ben Rose on Twitter. You can find my work at the Sports Illustrated Raptors channel. And as you mentioned, anytime Nick Nurse says something, I'm trying to get it out as fast as possible. I know you fantasy players are all over the news and want to know what's happening with the injury reporting, and we try and get that information and those questions out as fast as possible. So, you can follow me there for the latest information, but I don't have anything that's not online. So I'll report it as soon as I can. But before that, I got nothing for you.
You've given us plenty, Aaron. Thank you again. Hope we talk again soon, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
For sure. Stay safe.
You too. That was him. That was Aaron. Fantastic interview. Learned a lot there, and definitely a lot of things to keep track of with the Raptors as we go forward here. So, again, if you guys enjoyed that interview, want to see more style like that, drop a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. We have more of these coming up. It's a lot of fun to do, and they're definitely very informative. So for the second half of our show here, we are going to do a Q&A. I've seen that you guys are lacking on dropping some questions in. So if you've got any, please go for it. I'm here. If not, it's fine. I could also take some time off and go cook some dinner or something. But I'm here to talk some fantasy with y'all if you have any questions. Before we do that, I guess we'll do a quick preview of some of the things that we're watching tonight. Not a full-blown watch list like we do on this channel, but just a couple of names that are definitely worth monitoring for tonight's games, given some of the news that we have learned. The first of that, of course, is Lamarcus Aldridge. He is going to be making his Brooklyn Nets debut tonight. No Blake Griffin and no James Harden. I don't know why I led with Blake there, but because I guess Blake, those two are going to be competing for minutes once he gets all the way up to speed. Tonight, we're just going to be watching what Aldridge's role looks like in this offense. Again, it's going to be a little weird because without Harden and Blake, it's tough to really see, what that expectation is going to be going forward. But, I think we're just going to assess rust physically, how he meshes, where he's getting his minutes. What does it mean for Nick Claxton going forward? That's just a situation to monitor tonight and beyond. Another thing that we should be watching tonight is the New Orleans Pelicans Orlando Magic game. On the New Orleans side, they are out. Zion is out and Lonzo Ball is out, and Brandon Ingram is doubtful, basically out, it seems. Perhaps he's taking some time off because of the opponent with the Magic, but tonight's Nickeil Alexander-Walker streamer town. He's going to be, if you've got him on your team, you should be continuing to roll him out there because Lonzo, for his part, still seems a good ways away from coming back out there. So, until he is, Nickeil Alexander-Walker is going to take on a bunch of shots. He's been a great points and three streamer without Lonzo. And look, the argument could be made too that he's played so well to justify starting even when Lonzo's back. Maybe Eric Bledsoe transitions to the bench. We know that he has not really been an NBA quality starter on the year. It's certainly not impossible to envision, Lonzo taking on the majority of the point guard duties and Nickeil Alexander-Walker being that off-guard floor spacer that Lonzo's sort of turned himself into this year. So we're watching that, and Kyra Lewis as well, going to jump into a lot of usage with the three main guys out tonight for them. And then obviously we're continuing to watch everything on Orlando. Chuma Okeke has looked great. As the starting power forward since the trade deadline, he's been very productive. We are continuing to watch seeing who's going to get minutes here. That center rotation has been very interesting with Wendell Carter Jr., Kim Birch, and Mo Bamba sort of taking away from each other. Are we going to see any separation there tonight? Particularly with Wendell Carter Jr., is he going to ascend into that starting lineup soon and start taking on a starter's workload? Because there's a big opportunity for him if that happens. Otto Porter Jr., seeing what his workload looks like if he can get above the 25-minute mark. Terrence Ross. I mean, I can go through the whole roster. I just kind of did. We're watching the Magic, generally speaking. And Kevin Love is going to be starting for the Cavs tonight. I don't think we have word on Larry Nance Jr.'s availability. If we do, feel free to throw that in the chat, but I have not seen whether or not he's available. I'm pretty sure he's out. So Love, he's going to be on a minutes restriction. Obviously, he's had this calf injury since the beginning of the season, and he's basically re-aggravated it twice. I'm pretty sure that's what happened the last time that Love came back a couple of weeks ago. He played, didn't feel right, and then he missed like 2 more weeks. I mean, it's tough. It's real tough. If you've got him on your team, I do not know what to expect for him going forward, but it is not an ideal situation for Kevin Love health-wise. It's been really tough for him all year, but he's got opportunity tonight, even in limited minutes. We'll see what he can do with that. So we got a couple questions here in the chat. Let's just dive into the live Q&A here. We have Kinji asking, Gary Trent Jr., rest of season in 9-cat now that Lowry is injured. Well, Kinji, we just talked about this with Aaron Rose. We anticipate that Gary Trent Jr., whether Lowry is in or not, is going to have a featured role in this Raptors offense, just sheerly out of curiosity and seeing what they have in him. Especially with Lowry's out, he's guaranteed to play over 30 minutes a night and take a lot of shots. But the rub with him in 9-cat is that he's just a scorer. He doesn't contribute elsewhere in the box score. He gets you points and he gets you threes. And he can get you a steal here and there, but the rest of the stuff is really lacking, and that's not something that's going to change with more opportunity. I mean, you saw that huge game that he had last night. Despite 30+ points and 5 3-pointers, he had nothing else to really show for it in the box score. Generally speaking, if a good reference point was what he did in Portland after CJ McCollum was down during that stretch. He was barely on the cusp of top 100 value on 17 points per game and close to 3 3-pointers. So that's your hope, I guess, rest of season. And that's not a very high bar. I think there are better guys out there. He's worth a spot if you need to stream those categories, points and threes, certainly. But my expectations aren't much higher than that. From Samuel, hi guys, really enjoyed the insight. Hunter and Dennis Smith Jr. currently injured and both questionable. Who would you rather stash in the IR spot 9-cat head-to-head? I would prefer Hunter rest of season, only because Dennis Smith Jr.'s role as the starting point guard will be questioned. It will be in question whenever Killian Hayes comes back. And the news around Killian has been, there's nothing definitive out there at the moment. It does seem as if he is close to a return, and I think there's an expectation that he will play this year. And whenever he does get back out there, they're going to want to give him minutes because he's the 6th overall pick in the draft. He had a rough start to his career, and he at the moment is the Pistons' top asset. Perhaps you could argue that their pick this season is their top asset, but Killian Hayes is the player on their roster. That being said, Dennis Smith Jr. is heading for some terrific fantasy value until then, and he seems like he's going to play before Hunter. It's a little unclear. The information around Hunter's knee has been pretty nebulous. There's not a whole lot of concrete stuff out there at the moment. I anticipate that, he'll come back soon and he can perhaps reclaim that top 70, 60 pace he was on. But look, there was no real precedent for Hunter doing this until he did it during that 18-game stretch to start the year. And we haven't gotten a good look at him since then to believe that same level of production is coming. I still think that he's the better rest of season guy, but maybe in the immediate short term, it's going to be Dennis Smith Jr. But we'll see on that injury report. I haven't checked it since the show started. I don't know if either have been ruled in to this point. But until then, we're not. We'll have to wait and see. Next question here from Marlolra. I think I said that right. Your thoughts on Cousins' rest of season value? Not much. Demarcus Cousins is he's had some flashes in playing time in Houston, but I think it needs to be what we saw during his best days in Houston is a situation that he wouldn't have found anywhere else in the league. He's not going to be starting any for this team. I don't even think he's going to be hitting 20 minutes off the bench for this team. He strikes me as a guy who's just going to be situationally used. I don't think he's going to be taking Ivica Zubac's role. I think that he's still going to be your primary big. If anything, it seems like he's just going to be there for playoff depth. I don't even know how much he plays, if at all. So I'm not looking to roster Demarcus Cousins in pretty much any format. I don't even think that there's a league deep enough for me to consider that. I mean, if we see that he's playing 15 minutes a night, I mean, in your deepest of leagues, probably, I guess you could maybe look at him, but I don't think that he's come in Los Angeles to do anything other than just be there for, emergency center depth. And yes, and I see that from Adam there in the chat that Dennis Smith is active tonight, and you should all add him to your rosters if you haven't already. At the moment, he's going to just compile stats as that starting point guard. He was pretty impressive in a way that we have not seen from him before when he had that opportunity earlier in the year when Delon Wright was out. So, yeah, add Dennis Smith Jr. and we will, we'll see what he does with his role, and also very vetted interest in seeing what happens with DeAndre Hunter and his availability coming down the stretch here. Well, let's take a look at this comment here from Kinji. As far as picking up Dennis Smith Jr., you were debating dropping Keldon, Melton, and Fournier. Fournier's playing 30 minutes plus as a sixth man. What do you think? So here's the thing with Evan Fournier. I mean, in his few games in Boston, key guys have been out for both of them. Jaylen Brown in that first game, and Robert Williams missed last night as well, which meant that the Celtics were going to be playing smaller. I don't think he's playing 30 minutes a night when this team is healthy. Now, you can bet on them having a guy out here and there and making situations for Fournier to jump into a 30-minute role. But on this team, when Tatum and Brown are in there and healthy, he's at best a third option. I'd say he's fourth, maybe even fifth behind Kemba Walker and Marcus Smart. He was brought in there for wing depth. He's not going to be a featured part of this offense. He is only, I don't really know what his outlook is for sure, but when you look at what he was doing in Orlando, he was about a top 80 guy, despite the fact that he was their primary, option on the perimeter offensively, and he was getting playmaking opportunities that he's not going to see in Boston. It's tough for me to envision what that path is for Fournier when all things are equal in the Celtics team. So for me, he's the drop of that group there. I think that Melton's still got that upside, especially with Grayson Allen still out right now. I think that he just the potential promise of him returning some high end value if the Taylor Jenkins ever decides to give him more minutes makes him more valuable than Fournier. And I think that Keldon, as is in this role in San Antonio, is more valuable than Fournier. So that's the guy I would probably choose there. Got another question from Sam. We'll go roll right along. I've got some time. Why not? It sounds crazy, but who do you think will finish higher in rankings this season? Trey Young or Terry Rozier? And it pains me to say it, but if I were to make my best guess, it's probably going to be Terry Rozier. Let's just be honest about Trey. Everyone chose him in the first round this year, or a lot of people did. I guess obviously not everyone did. But he's only been a top 50 guy. He still has the limitations with turnovers. He's not getting it done in the defensive stats, and the shooting is still, he's a high volume, low 40% shooter. That stuff isn't just going to change, especially with the Hawks continuing to lose bodies. That doesn't help Trey in those categories. It would behoove him to have a full deck so that there's less attention being paid to him. Meanwhile, Rozier, I haven't taken a look at his rankings since sans LaMelo, but his role is secure. He's a featured part of that offense. He's been a top 30 player on the season. I think we're just at the point where, Trey was taken in that first round because of name value and expectations that he was going to elevate his game in different ways. And look, he's been great on the year. I think he still has improved as a player. It's just the statistical production hasn't exactly matched up to the first round valuation that we gave him. So that is that is ultimately, I think it's pretty clear it's going to be Rozier rest of the way, and we will we'll just keep cycling between you two because I like these questions. This is good stuff right now. Sam, you asked I'm going to take advantage of one more. Okiki and Jaden McDaniels and 9-cat head-to-head. I'll go Okiki. I think that he has a fuller 9-category game than McDaniels. But I mean, both are really enticing in sort of in the same ways because they're both sort of these defensive stat specialists with upside with 3-pointers. I just think Okiki has more opportunity than Jaden does, especially when D'Angelo Russell comes back and starts taking some shots and maybe even moves some of these forward down to play some power forward minutes. Like, I don't know, they're going to want to find time for both Russell and Anthony Edwards and Malik Beasley. So I think Okiki's got the best unfettered path to value between those two. Kenji, again, I picked up Wendell Carter. Do you think he's going to start over Mamba and Birch soon? I don't know if he will. I think he should. It would make a lot of sense considering the Magic, I guess you could say that the draft picks were the centerpiece of that Vucevic deal, or it was Wendell Carter. But I think from what we've seen, he has promise. I can't say that he's necessarily the best center there because Wendell's had a pretty up and down NBA career to this point, productive wise, and just when you're out there watching him, I would. My gut feeling is that yes, he will start. But I don't know if that means he's going to see starters minutes because it's just quite possible you're going to see Mo Bamba continue to play minutes and Kim Birch muddling up too. If Kim Birch was out of the picture, which is not going to happen, and I like Kim Birch, I have nothing against him, but I'm sure we'd all like to see Wendell Carter and Mo Bamba get opportunities to show that upside that we've all been waiting for since they got drafted in 2018. So yeah, Wendell's probably going to start. Remains to be seen what his actual fantasy value is going to be, though, with all those guys. Drew coming in here with a 14-team head-to-head question. Do I think Will Barton can keep these up rest of season? I think it's possible. I think it's possible. I mean, he is the starting 2 now, primarily, now that Aaron Gordon is in and Gary Harris is out. Not that Gary was playing much this year. But look, I think Will Barton, he came into the year injured. It was clear that hampered some of his production to start off. I mean, if I were to guess, he probably takes some dip in production once Aaron Gordon gets a little more acclimated to the offense and starts taking more shots. But I don't know. I mean, it's Will Barton, and then it's the guards off the bench, Monte Morris and Facundo Campazzo, who are going to be competing for those shooting guard minutes. And Barton has the edge over both of them. So I don't think opportunity is going anywhere necessarily. It might hurt him that he's playing more guard and less forwards now that you have that really large front court of Jokic, Aaron Gordon, and Michael Porter Jr. But, at the moment, I see no reason why that's probably going to go down. And yes, Adam, if common sense prevails, Wendell should start, but that is not I don't think you can say much of what Orlando has done over the years has necessarily followed that philosophy of common sense. So it remains to be seen. Again, a lot of questions on Orlando. Definitely the team I'm going to be watching the closest tonight. If I can turn those games on. I'm actually in Florida right now. So I haven't taken a look at the local listings, but maybe I can actually watch this Orlando Magic game live instead of through the CD means that I usually have to go through to watch one of those games. Well, guys, thank you for those questions. Thank you all for tuning in and hearing our conversation with Aaron Rose. Again, Aaron, you can follow him on Twitter at Aaron Rose, AARONBENROSE. Fantastic reporter for Sports Illustrated. Definitely someone you want to follow if you want up-to-date Raptors updates. And that's going to do it for us here. And hope you all enjoy the games tonight. Best of luck with your teams, and we'll catch you all on the next show. See y'all, everyone.